The moment I handed Paula my report, she completely lost her mind. She screamed that it was the worst work I'd ever submitted, but she had no idea I'd just used her own work against her. Let me tell you how this nightmare began. 19 years ago, I thought I'd landed my dream job at State Street Bank in Boston. Fresh out of college with a finance degree and burning ambition, I was ready to conquer the corporate world. The position was sold to me as a prestigious role on a mini project team, tackling complex financial operations with high-level executive visibility. During the interview process, they painted pictures of strategic analysis, direct contact with senior management, and fast-track career advancement. I was excited. I was motivated. I was about to discover I'd been completely deceived. My first red flag should have been the condition of my assigned workspace. Instead of the professional environment I'd expected, I found myself crammed into a windowless corner with a flickering fluorescent light and a computer that took 10 minutes to boot up. The promised collaborative team environment turned out to be 3 other equally miserable employees who barely made eye contact during my introduction. But the real nightmare was Paula. Paula was a woman in her mid-40s who'd clawed her way up from an entry-level position to middle management, and she wore that climb like armor. She had short, severely styled brown hair, always wore ill-fitting pantsuits in beige or gray, and had this way of looking at you like you'd personally insulted her family. Her office was decorated with motivational posters about excellence and attention to detail, which I would later realize was deeply ironic. My boss Paula turned out to be one of the most toxic human beings I've ever encountered. The promised high-visibility project work, complete fiction. Instead of strategic problem-solving, I was stuck compiling mind-numbing reports and gathering data from employees who were absolutely terrified of our team. Paula had turned our department into what I can only describe as a mushroom farm, keeping everyone in the dark while feeding us nothing but garbage. Within my first week, I witnessed Paula reduce a colleague named Jennifer to tears over a typo in an email subject line. Jennifer had been with the company for 8 years, was consistently rated as a top performer, but Paula made her feel like an incompetent child over a single misplaced letter. That's when I knew I was in trouble. "Standards matter," Paula would say, her voice dripping with condescension. "If you can't handle the small details, how can I trust you with anything important?" But here's what made Paula truly unbearable. She had this sick obsession with finding flaws in everything I produced. Every single report, every cover letter, every piece of work I submitted would come back covered in her red ink. And we're not talking about legitimate concerns about accuracy or important details. No, Paula focused on the most trivial, meaningless aspects of my work. She'd circle words like utilize and write USEs in angry capital letters. She'd draw arrows pointing to paragraph spacing and scrawl inconsistent across margins. Once she spent 15 minutes lecturing me about my use of 12-point font instead of 11-point font, insisting that the extra size showed arrogance and disregard for paper conservation. "Do you think rules don't apply to you?" she'd ask during these sessions, her beady eyes gleaming with what I can only describe as sadistic pleasure. "No, Paula, I just thought, don't think, follow the guidelines. That's what separates professionals from amateurs." One of my main responsibilities involved monitoring oil warrants out of Nigeria. For those who don't know, a warrant is essentially an agreement to buy a commodity at a specific price, regardless of current market value. We were tracking warrants that allowed purchases at $30 per barrel when oil prices had skyrocketed to $90 per barrel. The potential financial liability was absolutely massive if the warrant holders decided to exercise their options. This was genuinely critical work that required precision and attention to detail. Every single week, I'd compile these critical reports with accurate numbers, proper analysis, and clear summaries. I'd spend hours double-checking calculations, verifying data sources, and crafting comprehensive executive summaries that clearly outlined the risks and recommendations. The work was solid. I knew it, our clients knew it, and deep down, even Paula knew it. But every single week, Paula would call me into her office for what felt like public executions of my work. "Sit down," she'd command, not looking up from my report. The chair across from her desk had become my personal electric chair. "Let's discuss your latest effort." She'd tear apart my formatting. She'd criticize my word choices. She'd demand changes to the structure, the font, the spacing, the cover letter language, anything except the actual substance of the reports, which was always perfectly accurate. "Why did you use significant here instead of substantial?" she'd demand, tapping her red pen against the desk. I felt significant better. Conveyed the, "I don't care what you felt. This is business communication, not creative writing. Rewrite this entire section." "But Paula, the numbers and analysis are correct. The client needs this information, but the client needs professional work, not whatever this is supposed to be." Week after week after week, this torture continued. I'd spend hours perfecting reports, staying late to ensure every detail was flawless, only to watch Paula find new ways to humiliate me over completely meaningless details. The numbers were right, the analysis was solid, but somehow she always found something wrong with how I presented the information. I started having trouble sleeping. My stomach would knot up every Sunday night, knowing I'd have to face Paula's office again. I began questioning my abilities, wondering if maybe I really was as incompetent as she made me feel. The confident college graduate who'd walked through those doors was slowly being crushed under the weight of Paula's relentless criticism. My girlfriend at the time, Sarah, would find me at my kitchen table at midnight, obsessing over font choices and paragraph spacing. "This is insane," she'd say, rubbing my shoulders as I stared at my laptop screen. "You're analyzing oil market volatility, not designing wedding invitations. The formatting shouldn't matter this much, but if I don't get it right, she'll just tear it apart again," I'd reply, adjusting margins for the 20th time. "Honey, no formatting is going to satisfy someone who doesn't want to be satisfied." Sarah was right, but I wasn't ready to hear it yet. I was still trying to win Paula's approval, still believing that if I could just produce the perfect report, she'd finally recognize my value. I was already planning my escape from this toxic environment when fate handed me the perfect opportunity for revenge. One particularly frustrating afternoon after Paula had torn apart my latest report over excessive use of bullet points, I was searching through network files for reference materials. I needed examples of previous formatting to understand what she actually wanted, since her verbal instructions were about as clear as mud. That's when I stumbled across something incredible. Hidden in an old project folder labeled Historical Analysis Archive were reports from a similar assignment completed years earlier. The formatting looked familiar. The language seemed oddly professional, and then I saw the author's name at the bottom of the first document. P. Morrison. Paula Morrison. My heart started racing as I opened document after document. These were her reports from before she'd been promoted to management. Her formatting, her language, her structure. The very same Paula who'd been tearing my work apart had once produced reports using the exact same approach I was taking. Better yet, her reports were filled with the exact same choices she'd been criticizing in my work. 12-point font instead of 11. The word utilize appeared 17 times in one document. Bullet points everywhere. Paragraph spacing that was, by her current standards, wildly inconsistent. I sat back in my creaky office chair, staring at the screen in disbelief. Paula had been torturing me for months over stylistic choices that she herself had made. The hypocrisy was staggering, but more importantly, it was weaponizable. A slow smile spread across my face as a beautiful plan began to form. You know what I did next? I copied everything. Her formatting, her cover letter language, her report structure, even her specific word choices. I spent the next 2 hours meticulously studying Paula's old work, taking screenshots, and creating detailed notes about her approach. Every font choice, every margin setting, every turn of phrase, I documented it all. Then I took my next oil warrant report and transformed it to match Paula's old work exactly. Same fonts, same spacing, same organizational approach. I even copied entire sentences from her cover letters, adapting them to fit the current situation. The only things I changed were the current numbers and dates to reflect the present market conditions. The anticipation was killing me as I walked to her office that Friday afternoon. My hands were actually shaking slightly as I knocked on her door frame. "Come in," Paula barked, not looking up from her computer. "Here's this week's warrant report," I said, placing the document on her desk with the most innocent expression I could manage. Paula picked up her red pen, that damned red pen that had haunted my dreams, ready for another weekly demolition session. I settled into the familiar chair of doom, clasping my hands in my lap to hide their trembling. What happened next was absolutely beautiful. Paula's face turned red as she scanned the first page. Her jaw clenched. Her hands started shaking slightly. She flipped through the report faster and faster, and I could see her blood pressure rising with every page. Her breathing became audibly heavier. What is this?" she muttered, flipping back to the first page. Then she exploded. "What the hell happened to your usual format?" she screamed, slamming the report down on her desk. "This is completely different from what you normally submit." I maintained perfect composure, though inside I was doing cartwheels. "Since you didn't seem satisfied with my previous approach, I thought it would be best to try something new. I wanted to show that I'm responsive to feedback and willing to adapt." Paula was just getting started. She launched into the most vicious criticism I'd ever received from her, which was saying something. According to Paula, this report was worse than anything I'd ever produced. The formatting was unprofessional and sloppy. The language was confusing and unclear. The structure was illogical and hard to follow. "Look at this," she shouted, jabbing her finger at the page. 12-point font? Who uses 12-point font in a business report? And what's with all these bullet points? This looks like a grocery list, not financial analysis. I thought the bullet points would make the key information easier to Don't interrupt me. And this word choice, utilize instead of use, what are you trying to prove with this pretentious language? This is exactly the kind of amateur mistake I've been trying to train out of you. She went on, her voice getting louder and more condescending with every criticism. She attacked my paragraph spacing, my margin choices, my section headers, my executive summary structure. Every single element that she herself had used in her own reports was now apparently evidence of my incompetence. I sat there in complete silence, maintaining a blank expression while Paula destroyed every aspect of the report. Inside, I was absolutely thriving. This was better than I'd hoped. She was eviscerating herself with more passion and creativity than I could have ever mustered. After what felt like 20 minutes of brutal criticism, Paula finally paused to catch her breath. Her face was flushed, her hair was slightly messed from her animated gesturing, and she was breathing like she'd just run a marathon. "What were you possibly thinking when you made these changes?" she demanded, glaring at me across her desk. This was my moment. The moment I'd been building toward. I took a slow breath and delivered the killing blow. "I used the formatting and language you developed when you were doing similar reports a few years back," I said calmly, my voice steady and professional. "I found your old project folder on the network and used your past work as a template. I followed your methodology exactly and only changed the numbers and dates to reflect current information." Paula's face went completely white. The color drained from her cheeks so quickly, I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "What? What did you say?" "Your old reports from the archive folder," I continued, reaching into my folder. I thought it made sense to learn from the established best practices in our department. I pulled out printed copies of her original reports and slid them across her desk. "Here are your old reports for comparison. As you can see, I followed your methodology exactly. Same formatting, same language patterns, same organizational structure." The silence in that office was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop 3 floors down. Paula stared at the documents, her eyes moving back and forth between her old work and my current report. Her face cycled through confusion, recognition, and then pure, undiluted humiliation. She just spent 20 minutes absolutely destroying her own work, calling it unprofessional, amateurish, and incompetent. Her hands were visibly shaking now as she held the papers. I watched her realize that every criticism she just hurled at me was actually a criticism of herself. Every amateur mistake she'd identified was her own choice. Every unprofessional element was something she'd created. "Should I go back to my old format then?" I asked innocently, tilting my head slightly. "Since you feel this approach is so problematic, I don't want to continue using methods that don't meet our department's standards." Paula couldn't even look at me. She stared at the papers for what felt like an eternity, her jaw working silently. Finally, she grabbed her pen and quickly scrawled her signature across the approval line. "Send it as is," she mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "Are you sure?" I pressed, unable to resist twisting the knife just a little. "Less than a minute ago, you said it was basically unreadable and unprofessional. I want to make sure we're sending out quality work that reflects well on our department." "It's fine," she snapped, still not looking up. "We don't have time to redo it now. But if the formatting is as problematic as you indicated..." "I said it's fine," she barked, finally looking up with murder in her eyes. I stood up slowly, gathering my papers. "Okay, I'll send it out this afternoon. Thank you for the feedback, Paula. This was very educational. If you're enjoying this story of workplace justice, hit subscribe. We post new revenge stories every single day." But I wasn't done with Paula yet. Oh no, this was just the beginning of my beautiful campaign of revenge. I was smart enough to anticipate Paula's next move. That same afternoon, I went back to the network and methodically copied every single one of her old reports, templates, and project files. I saved everything locally on my personal drive, organized it into folders by date and project type, and even backed it up on a flash drive. I had a feeling this treasure trove was going to come in handy. Sure enough, when I checked the network the following Monday morning, Paula had deleted or moved all of her old folders. Every trace of her previous work had vanished from the shared drives. She'd spent her weekend trying to bury the evidence of her hypocrisy, but I had already won this war. For the remainder of my time at State Street Bank, I played the most satisfying game of cat and mouse with Paula. Every report, every cover letter, every document I submitted was based on her own previous work. I had enough material to last months. Different projects, different time periods, different formatting approaches she'd used throughout her career, and every single time Paula would tear it apart without realizing she was criticizing herself. Week after week, I'd watch her destroy formatting choices she'd made. I'd listen to her complain about language she'd written. I'd sit silently as she demanded changes to structures she'd created. The irony was absolutely delicious. "This executive summary is too wordy." She'd complain about a summary I'd copied directly from her 2001 quarterly report. "These charts are poorly positioned," she'd criticize, referring to chart placement she'd used consistently in her own work. "Your conclusions are buried in too much detail," she'd lecture, apparently having forgotten her own methodical approach to analysis. Each session became a masterclass in self-destruction. Paula would work herself into increasingly creative fits of criticism, unknowingly attacking her own professional competence with each comment. After a few months of this beautiful torture, Paula finally started to suspect something. The look in her eyes began to change from mere irritation to genuine suspicion. She'd study my reports more carefully, as if trying to solve a puzzle. One morning in late spring, she called me into her office with a particularly wary expression. "Sit down," she said, but this time her tone was different. Less aggressive, more cautious. "Where are you getting these templates?" she demanded, leaning forward across her desk. I looked her straight in the eye, maintaining perfect innocence. "I created standard operating procedures based on historical examples from our department files. I compiled all the best practices I could find and saved them locally for consistency. It seemed like the logical thing to do, learning from the established methodologies." Paula's eyes narrowed. "What historical examples?" "Various reports and documents from previous projects. I wanted to ensure I was following departmental standards rather than just making things up as I went along." "Isn't that what you've been encouraging me to do? Learn from established best practices?" Paula knew she'd been beaten. She could see the trap she'd walked into, but she couldn't escape it without admitting her own hypocrisy. She couldn't criticize me for using her own work as a reference without acknowledging that she'd been tearing apart her own professional standards. She couldn't complain about me following established procedures without admitting those procedures were flawed. She was trapped by her own methodology, caught in a web of her own making, and we both knew it. Just stick with whatever system you're using now," she finally said, her voice deflated. The dynamic in our office changed completely after that confrontation. Paula still reviewed my work. She had to, it was her job. But the harsh criticism stopped. She couldn't tear apart reports that were based on her own templates without looking like a complete fool. Her red pen made fewer appearances. Her voice lost its condescending edge. For the first time since I'd started working there, I had peace. My Sunday night anxiety disappeared. I stopped staying late to obsess over font choices. Sarah noticed the change immediately. "You seem different," she said one evening as we cooked dinner together. "Happier, more confident." "I figured out how to handle Paula," I replied, grinning. "What did you do?" I gave her exactly what she wanted, her own work. A few months later, I finally found a new job and escaped that toxic environment. A financial services firm in downtown Boston offered me a position with better pay, actual growth opportunities, and most importantly, a manager who seemed like a decent human being. My last day at State Street Bank was one of the most satisfying of my career. I'd beaten Paula at her own game, using her weapons against her, and turned her toxic management style into my own personal entertainment. As I packed up my desk, removing the few personal items I'd accumulated over my tenure, Paula watched from her office doorway. She didn't say goodbye, didn't wish me well, just stood there with her arms crossed. I could see the mixture of relief and resentment in her eyes. She was glad to see me go. I'd become an uncomfortable reminder of her own inconsistencies, but she knew I'd outplayed her completely. I walked past her office one final time, carrying my cardboard box of belongings. "Good luck with the new hire," I said pleasantly. I left detailed notes about all the formatting standards and procedures I developed. Wouldn't want them to have to start from scratch. Paula's face twitched, but she said nothing. I never spoke to Paula again after that day. But I heard through former colleagues that she became much more careful about how she managed her team after I left. Apparently, the brutal criticism sessions became less frequent, and she started focusing more on substance than style. Maybe my little lesson taught her something about leadership and respect. Or maybe she just realized that her own past work could be weaponized against her again. Looking back 19 years later, I'm still proud of how I handled that situation. Paula thought she could bully and humiliate me with impunity. She thought her position gave her the right to tear down my confidence and make me miserable over meaningless details. She used her authority as a weapon to make herself feel powerful at my expense. But in the end, her own arrogance became the weapon that destroyed her power over me. Every cruel comment, every arbitrary criticism, every moment of manufactured outrage came back to haunt her when she realized she was attacking herself. Sometimes the best revenge is simply holding up a mirror and letting someone see who they really are. Paula got to experience firsthand what it felt like to have her work destroyed by unreasonable criticism, to have her professional competence questioned over trivial details, to sit helplessly while someone in authority made her feel small and incompetent. And the beauty was, she did it all to herself. Fuck you, Paula. I hope you learned something.